Green, and I'm going to go. Staff ready? Council ready?
Yes, sir.
I'm going to call to order this Kearl City Council workshop for August 27th. Do we have any member of the public who wishes to speak to us?
Yes, sir. William Rector.
Dr. William Rector. Dr. Rector, you're up. No, it said public comments, and you signed up. Are you?
Yes, it's on Tuesday. On the workshop, we always do public comments
Oh, okay.
at the first.
Well, I want to thank you, council people, for working on a tree ordinance, working on a preservation of our trees. I have watched over the years with concern as we've seen tree after tree be cut down. I've had leaders of our community, whom I respect greatly, who have bulldozed down trees and have told me to my face they're going to replace them. It has not happened, even to this day. So we need some incentive for people, even good people, to follow through on their promises, to make sure that we have trees within our community. I've watched as Scooters, I've watched as Hobby Lobby has bulldozed down trees that could, in the end, have left and have been attractive for our community. So I thank you for considering this, for considering looking at a tree ordinance in a way to protect not only trees, but to protect our community. This is not a property rights issue. This is a community issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Philip Christian.
Hello.
My name's Philip, I guess I should get closer. My name's Philip Christian. I'm a degreed forester, and I'm also a member of the ISA. I'm a certified arborist, and I really would like to say I appreciate the city putting together a tree ordinance. I think that's a great idea. It's well past time to get that done. Although I haven't read through the whole presentation that I just picked up outside the lobby, but I have recognized that there's several errors in the definition of things that need to be probably addressed before it goes further.
This is discussion only tonight, so we're not going to actually pass anything tonight.
Right. But I was just
Good.
saying it probably needs to be addressed before it goes.
Certainly. Well, maybe after we discuss it tonight, you could give staff your contact information, and you can make some suggestions on those definitions. Would that be
Okay.
helpful? Anything else?
Nothing else I can think of.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate the city's doing this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of the citizen
All right.
speakers.
We're missing one tonight. So let's appoint her to some committees.
Great idea.
All right, 2A, we're going to start with Mr. Hornis.
I want to start with our intern's introduction. Yes, so.
Yeah, so that's all I got.
Mayor and members of council, I did have a little bit of fun with that. We all did. But I remember my first meetings that I had to address, and I was nervous as all get out. So we are here today to have a little bit of a discussion about TERS number 1, so the downtown TERS. So everybody can recall the boundaries of that are pretty wide, cover a pretty large swath of the downtown area. I brought up a few things that Julie had brought up at the TERS board meeting. This is part of her presentation, just as some background information. So in the base year in 2019, there was almost $98 million in valuation. As of 24, that number had jumped to $156 million. And you'll see that for fiscal year 25, there's a slight decrease in that. And part of that has to do with property disputes, between KCAD and the property owners about the valuations of the properties. However, we have had an additional value this year of just over $500,000 of new value. That's not existing stuff that has gone up, that is new construction. It's been added to the rolls. Last year, we had a little less than $1 million added to that. There are a number of properties in the TERS district, almost 600 of them. And I don't need y'all to dive in too deep on this. We can present you with the budget, should you want to see that TERS budget. But the projections for next year, ending fund balance, is just over $1 million. So up until now, the fund balance has been pretty minimal, and there's been conversations with the TERS board about small participation in projects. You'll see on there, there's $52,000 in '23, and that was to act as a match to a grant project for downtown. And then there's $50,000 allocated towards it this year. But no substantial projects, and that's no surprise. This thing is set for 30 years, so it's going to be in place for quite a long time. Originally, the plan outlines in it that there's just over $17 million in public improvements that are expected. When this is set up, you have to set up the financing plan. You say, what are you going to do with those funds? How are you going to allocate it? What percentages? All of that is a guess. So those things are going to change over time as projects come before you, as years go by, and ideas for what to do change based on any number of factors. And so right now there's probably 10% for water, 10% for sewer, stormwater, 10 for parking, 10 for intersections. I think there's a little bit more for open spaces and economic development. I think economic development grants at this point represent about 25% of the total of that expected money. But again, we're talking about $17 million over 30 years, right? So that's a long stretch of time and a substantial amount of money each year. But we're also talking about capital projects for the city. And each one of our capital projects is, generally speaking, above that $1 million range. When we have to dig into the dirt, we have to tear up the road, put old pipe in, take old pipe out, put new pipe in, excuse me. Those projects, they have larger price tags than, generally speaking, what TERS can contribute in that year. TERS can also not issue bonds. So they can't issue indebtedness for dollars that they don't have, right? So why are we here today? The TERS board has been meeting a little more frequently. There has been a few more requests. There is a growing fund balance, so people notice that, and so conversations start to happen where, hey, can we work on this project? Or as staff, we look at it and say, there are some gaps. Are there ways that we can mitigate that and find sources that are dedicated to that area and our special funds? None of those projects that we've looked at, are there enough of a fund balance within the TERS to cover any one of them at this point? And we're not sure that that's necessarily the purpose of what you all envision for that TERS either. But the requests are starting to come in. And first one that we've kind of seen that's a little bit more robust than requests that we have seen before is an area at Clay Street and, Shriner and Clay. It's an intersection right there. There was a discussion several years ago about making that into a roundabout. Some of the easements were acquired, and we took and asked our engineers to give us kind of a rough number on what do you think that would be. Not full engineered plans, not design. And they were like, well, it's going to be over $1 million. So at that point, there's no funds to go towards that. But it's still just sort of a cost that we're not sure of, right? They take a, I don't like to say, how much is that going to cost? And we say it's $1 million, and then it turns around and that's actually $1.2 million, $1.4 million, because we've said $1 million once. But substantially more than we had funds for, because we obviously have millions and millions of dollars worth of asks, and we only have, I think we have $2.5 million in the street budget for road repair each year. And there's a lot of streets. So this one did come up. It's within the TERS boundary. The TERS board has heard this request. Mr. Stone is business owner down there. One of the easements that was acquired was through him. And so they discussed how it is that they would help fund this. And it's an interesting process because the TERS board is an advisory board. So it's not exactly like the EIC that has funding, And it's not the same mechanism, right? But they are an advisory board to you all. And so I often get in trouble because what's the chicken and the egg? Who comes first, right? The city council is the ultimate decider on all these things. And so as these projects come through the door, we want to make sure that we're having kind of robust conversations. We know where your direction wants to go. This is an example of just a concrete example of here's a project, right? But if we go back to that map, that's a big boundary, right? There's $17 million to allocate towards projects throughout that entire area, right? Now, this project, this is in Kerrville 2050. You'll see this is part of that cuts area. It's a great project, like all the projects that we have. One of the issues with it is we don't know how much it will ultimately be. And so how do we address that? We come to you and ask to have an engineer give us an opinion of probable cost, give us a design. If we can't fund it right now, we can put that on the shelves, and by and large, that project isn't going to change much as far as the construction documents go, albeit the numbers are going to increase. And so we would ask the engineers 5, 10 years down the road, what would the cost be now, right? So we have received a design cost from our street engineer. And one of those deliverables they'll give to us is that opinion of construction cost. And so just wanted to broach this with you. We haven't really brought up TERS too much because there hasn't been a whole lot to talk about. And so this is kind of one of the first stabs at seeing where the city council would like that direction for the TERS board to take, and how you all would like to proceed. With that, I'll turn it over to any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Hornis?
Just a couple of things that I want to say, not necessarily questions. Is this that area kind of in front of the beer barn?
Yes, ma'am. That's that turn on Shriner where it, you're going past.
Okay. Has anybody gotten a count, maybe from the chief, of how many accidents have happened at that intersection? And the reason I ask is because we've had an accident at that intersection. And so I'm looking at it from a safety perspective. Would that roundabout in that area slow that traffic down and make it safer at that intersection?
I think that's part of the purpose for it, right? Is to do that. It is an interesting intersection where that street was it was there, right? So you'll see, that the businesses are right up against
Yes.
that right of way. So there are some limits to how we can adjust it. And that iteration that we have that concept of, probably the best version, what's safest, I suppose.
Has anybody done a traffic count?
We'd have to get back to you on that. I don't know that we have that right now.
Well, I've done one.
I think Mr. Stone has as well, right? And so
But this was back, of course, several years ago, but at the time, there was like 3,980 vehicles that went through there, which is a considerable amount. So anything that we can do, what I've always advocated for is that we use that TERS money within the 440 acre zone, which is what it is, and that it benefit everybody in that zone, and not those funds not be delegated out to a specific business, That's what was important to me. So I see this as a way, number one, to increase safety in that area, but to also benefit the entire zone. So that, I just want to say that.
Anything else?
Nope.
Well, I'd be interested to see what kind of statistics we have that suggest, that the roundabout is needed, or, I'm not against roundabouts particularly, but I don't know, you're the first accident I've heard of. I don't know how many accidents are there. I'd be some sort of a,
Yeah, that would be,
spend over $1 million just for a roundabout unless there's really a need.
yes, sir. We can absolutely get that information. And this today is to talk about engineering, not
yeah.
funding construction of it.
Mr. Harris, anything?
Yes, sir. Mr. Hornis, if we could, to kind of go back to Councilmember Hughes and Mr. McKinney's question, we get the statistics off of our roundabout at Gulf Street and Ivy/Cypress to see what kind of traffic accidents we've had there, if we've had any, how it's gotten better. Before I moved back home after the Marine Corps, I lived on St. Simon's Island in Georgia, and they had a traffic circle. And when they put that in, at first, there were more accidents because people didn't know how to drive around in a circle. It's, and I got stuck in it one day, and I felt like I was in European vacation. I was like, look, kids, Big Ben to Parliament over and over. But if you give a signal, if you do the things like, if you get in it and you want to turn right and you give a signal, it lets other people know what you're doing, but that's just common courtesy of driving anyway. But if we could get the numbers off of both of those, and I think that would help. I don't dislike traffic circles or roundabouts, as you want to say. I think it is a deterrent if they're done right. I know 3 that aren't done right, and they really aren't a deterrent. But we'll leave those alone. So, but, yeah, if we could just see some stats on that, please.
Absolutely.
Direct your attention to page 4 of 6 of the letter from the engineering firm. In the middle of that page, it says exclusions, traffic impact analysis.
We can do some of that on our own. So typically they would do, you know, if it's building construction for a new entity that's coming in, they're gonna do traffic impact analysis.
We're not going to do it for this.
We can add to it.
No, I'm not asking to add to it, but every council member here is saying, what's the impact of traffic? And this money we're spending is not going to answer that question,
We'd have to do some of that internally.
okay? Secondly, it's not talking about utility design or ADA review or even inspection of the construction. So what's the benefit of this study again? Please help me understand. It's going to be like 4 sheets, basically.
This gets, well, it gets you the construction documents that we would be looking for. It would get us that, so we would have that on the shelf. We would be able to turn that over if we wanted to go into construction, and those are the documents that we would put out for the project. The exclusions, the additions, those are beyond the design components to it. Those are additions we could add if we would like to see those. If we wanted to get more robust numbers than we have for traffic impact analysis, then we can try
If
to
you
do that.
think we can get accurate data that answers 3 of the council member here's questions from our own internal data, that's fine with me.
I think we should do that before we spend money on, make sure we really want to.
I just want to make sure everybody understood that what we're asking for from the engineers isn't going to be part of that.
Yeah.
Secondly, I did have a quick conversation with Mr. Stone, who is one of the property owners affected. And I'm not putting words in his mouth, but he seems supportive of the idea, so that's good. Had the property owners not been supportive of the idea, it would be difficult for me to support the idea. Okay? In some ways, if we cannot demonstrate that this will improve safety, it's going to be hard to support it as well. I mean, I get the aesthetic idea that was originally presented 5 years ago by Cuts. I get it. I was there. I spoke at that event.
Yes, sir.
But just a pretty circle isn't going to cut it. It actually has to demonstrate that it's safer in that intersection.
We can compare it to other intersections and see, you know, if it's more dangerous than other ones.
We can bring that information back to another workshop.
Good. So the next step, if I understand it, we're going to give consensus today, and then you would ask the TERS board, and it would come back to us? What's the process?
Well, so this is just right. This isn't consideration for y'all to do that. At this point, we would come back to you. I think what we would do now is bring it back as another workshop item, knowing what y'all want to see a little bit more. Make sure that we have some of that data. It might take us a little while to pull all of that. And then we could have another workshop if y'all want to. At that point, make that an actionable item. We'll bring it back to the next agenda, and then that would be a request to take it to TERS. So we'd be looking at.
Yeah, I had it moved from the regular meeting to the workshop because a majority of council hadn't ever spoken about this.
Right.
It hadn't been spoken since I was on council, and I've been here since 2022. I was aware of the project because I attended many of the CUTS meetings, but we needed to understand what exactly we were trying to do. If it's just an aesthetic circle, that's a solution in search of a problem, not a problem in search of a solution.
Sure.
So it has to improve safety. We have to demonstrate it improves safety. Okay? I'm also concerned that there's three crosswalks on a four-corner place. Has any consideration been on that fourth crosswalk, or there's only going to be three?
At this point, that's all just design concept, so it would all be designed for safety.
If I
And so-
understand CUTS's mission is to improve walkability and to make it safe to get from one side of the street to the other without a crosswalk, seems to be counter to that idea. Understand?
Yeah, especially on the main road there, Shiner Street.
Yeah, it's trying. That's a complicated intersection. Some of the people one of the persons who've written in favor of this talked about it would improve drainage. I think drainage already goes down Shriner Street toward Sidney Baker. There used to be a huge culvert that direction.
It does. There's a pretty good sized hole right there at the southeast corner, I guess, right there, and it drains right to it. We've had to do some work along, like if you notice at Rails, there's a kind of a hump there to get into that driveway. Part of that is to address some of the drainage issues that they've got.
And this would help with that too, maybe?
We would work towards solutions for that as well as a part of that design.
All right. Any other comments or questions as we proceed? All right. Well, we'll look forward to hearing back from you then.
Yes, sir.
Next item is 2B, Mr. Hornes.
So this item is an agreement that the city has with the EIC to fund a portion of the river trail from the library to currently where it's at to the pavilion. So that contract is proposed to be complete by December of this year, and that's complete with construction. We are not going to reach that milestone. We have been in the process of easement acquisition and continue to do so for this section. We have the majority of them, but we don't have them all. And so what we broached with EIC is the idea of pausing this project and actually enlarging its scope. And I'll get into that in a second, but just wanted to go over the funding for the river trail. This is something from Ashley's presentations on this going back to 22. The timelines for all of the river trail, not necessarily just this portion. This one goes back to a concept study in 21, the addition of this section of the river trail to the master plan for the river trail master plan. And again, today we have all but one of the easements committed and acquired for this section, but it just takes one. So the Parks and Rec master plan talks about expanding the river trail all the way from G Street to downtown. So this is in two phases. Mr. Hewitt's engineering firm provided that to the city. And so phase 2 is kind of an expensive portion compared to phase 1 because of the steepness of that bank. Makes it a little bit harder for construction. That blue dotted area there, that is the expansion that we've been talking about. And what was funded and what was agreed to between the city and the EIC was to fund phase 1. So that is from the library ramp down to the pavilion. It's about 1,600 feet, another 3,500 feet from where it ends to G Street, which is the entirety of that project, again, broken into two phases. So, why are we here today? What we would like to do is our recommendation, and that recommendation to EIC as well, is to stop project of phase 1. We aren't going to meet the deadline anyway, so we'd have to come back and amend it. We have talked to some of the property owners and some of the folks who have been in discussions with the property owners going down to G Street about acquiring easements down to there. If we can focus on that, and acquire those easements, I think we can make a better pitch to folks who aren't interested in the easements with us. I think it's a better pitch if we can say it's going all the way down to G Street. One of the bigger reasons for us to do this, though, is that TxDOT has what's called a Transportation Alternatives Grant. They want to divert people from walking on the side of the road to walking into a safer place. It's a big priority for them. And they have a grant every 2 years, and there's a grant upcoming there'll be a call for 2025. It starts in December. And so our recommendation is that we pause that project, we go after the rest of those easements, which we need anyway, and apply for funding through the TxDOT Transportation Alternatives Grant, which has potentially an 80-20 match. Now that would leverage, if they were to fund all of the 80 for the entire portion from the library to G Street, we would actually spend less money than we have allocated for it right now. However, TxDOT has a lot of projects, same as you all do, and so they may come back if they've already said it's a good project, but they always tell us the same thing. If you don't have easements, then there's no point in us funding it because you won't be able to build it, right? If we can get those easements though, even if they could only fund it at 50%, that would cover, I mean, that's a huge chunk of that project. I think would be worthwhile for us to consider pausing to see if TxDOT would be willing to help us with that. And if they say no, well, we have the easements for the rest of it, and we can rediscuss going after sections and phases for the rest of the construction project. Our recommendations are to stop current agreement, work on obtaining those easements, and then apply in December for TxDOT's transportation alternatives. That's all I got. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
Did you say there was one holdout on the easements?
Currently, right now, property was under contract, which is part of the issue, and so divesting themselves of an easement while the property's under contract is hard.
Okay,
We also have to convince everybody to want to do it. And so I think if we have easements that go all the way down to G Street, it's a better pitch at this point, because we're talking about a lot of additional funding from the state, potentially. You know, it actually connects current river trail to current river trail. It wouldn't be just stopping at the pavilion. But yes, ma'am, right now at the section that we're going after, we have.
But from the pavilion back to G Street, you've got all those easements.
No, we'd have to go after those between now and December.
I see.
Mr. Howard Mr. Larry Howard, he's been helping us kind of talk through some of that with some of the owners. Has acquired a piece of it himself, and so I think we have 13, is that right? 13 properties on the current section, and I think there's 20 plus on the section from Tranquility to G Street.
and this is just a question. Is there a reason why we need to have the Riverwalk on both sides of the river? Will the one side not suffice for getting people off the streets?
From TxDOT's consideration, or just from
Just
from
in
our
general.
portion of it, right?
Yeah.
So you create loops in the system, which is never a bad thing, right? From TxDOT's point of view, to use that section of the river trail, to use the section that we currently have as a transportation alternative, I don't know that they would see that as feasible, right? Because you're got to cross the bridge, you're gonna have to go all the way on the outside. So I think they would see this as a more attractive project.
Okay,
The Parks and Rec Department and the board, they have recommended this. This is their highest priority section of the river trail. Is that correct?
In the community through master plan.
okay.
I think one of the reasons go ahead, please, I'm sorry.
Do what?
I'm so sorry. And the connection to downtown was a priority.
Yeah,
Okay.
it ties in downtown.
Okay, all right.
Any other comments? As we proceed, I'm going to put on my old history writer's hat. As we proceed, just downstream from the pavilion is what remains of the old mill, the old Dietert Mill. And it may be the oldest man-made structure other than since Kerrville was founded. Hopefully, as the project extends that direction, that mill can be either preserved or not completely destroyed. And there's still parts of that mill visible as you go down there. Further, as you go down toward G Street, there are a lot of bluffs there. You're going to be down in the riverbed, basically, or you're going to be on top of the bluff. Specifically at Spring Street, probably almost A through G streets, there's a bluff. So as you go down there, you mentioned how expensive this first section is, but that middle section is going to be pretty tight too.
It's probably the most expensive section of
Yeah.
River Trail we've seen so far.
So as someone who has trespassed on almost all those properties as a child, that section's going to be challenging as well.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other comments or questions? You don't really need anything from us. The next thing to do is EIC is going to cancel this project, correct? I'm looking at the recommended action, it says discussion only.
Yeah. We'll have to bring it back
Okay.
for y'all to cancel that.
We cancel or EIC cancels it?
Well,
Either
Either of you.
could.
yeah,
They're the funders, so
they're in agreement with it. They want
do you need consensus from us? What do you need from us tonight that will help?
we'll bring it back to you at the meeting on the 10th. We'll start moving forward with these.
This is information tonight.
Yes, sir.
Thank you kindly. Anything else on this item?
Interesting point
Huh?
that I want to ask Chief McCall.
Yes.
What's the statute of limitations on trespassing as a young adult?
I wasn't even an adult yet. Yes, my parents had a strict rule, do not go to the river, which meant, of course, we were in the river the whole time. Anything else on 2B? All right, let's go to 2C. Mr. Paxton.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Wanted to give an update on the tree preservation ordinance. Since council's last seen it, we do have 2 new council members and have draft ordinance for review. Just as a reminder, it is one of the action items of the Kerrville 2050 plan, consider a tree preservation ordinance. And there are several other action items that relate to tree preservation and landscaping. I won't go through each of those, you've seen them before. The current efforts, we have the tree preservation guidelines, which recommend tree preservation, but do not require it. UGRA has a couple programs to protect riparian areas, stormwater quality and mitigation grant program, and rainwater harvesting rebate program. And we still have a recommended plants for the Kerrville area. So the methodology that the council decided on was to pursue a tree preservation ordinance. And the purpose of this is to preserve neighborhood character, improve the quality of living, preserve and enhance the rural atmosphere of Kerrville, responsibly protect the natural environment and resources of Kerrville, preserve the rugged beauty and natural environment that defines the hill country, and prevent the clear cutting of land. So the tree preservation method would go through large tree species and small tree species, protected category and heritage category. So protected trees would be 8 inches to 18 inches. We had a recommendation from our local experts to include hackberries 10 inches and larger. Small tree species would be 6 to 8 inches protected, and 40% of those trees on a development project would be preserved. For the heritage category, it'd be anything larger than 18 inches. For your small trees, anything larger than 8 inches, and 60% of those trees shall be protected. Anything within the 100-year floodplain is protected, and 80% of those trees are required to remain. This will be applicable to commercial and residential subdivisions in the city limits and as drafted in the ETJ. There are oak wilt restrictions, and a professional tree care and landscaping companies shall obtain a permit prior to tree trimming. There are exceptions for hazardous conditions, storms, diseased or dead trees. There's again a permit requirement for the preservation and removal of trees. There are tree pruning restrictions to prevent tree topping and require wound dressings to prevent oak wilt. Protected trees, if they are removed and replaced, protected trees are a 1-to-1 ratio for caliper inch of tree. Heritage trees would be 3-to-1 replacement. Developers would have the option for a fee in lieu of replacement, limited to 50% of the required preserved trees. And that would be $150 per caliper inch of trees removed. And the penalty for any unauthorized removal is $500 per caliper inch. And both of those fees would go into a tree mitigation and replacement fund. We did include incentives for tree preservation. There's an opportunity for parking space reduction. If there is a waiver for sidewalk installation, if a tree is prohibiting the installation of sidewalk, they are able to remove that if needed. And then tree clusters count for a higher percentage than just the caliper inch based on those existing tree stands. And the protected measures, or there includes protection measures for during construction and how those trees are to be protected from all the equipment on a development project. And then again, failure to comply, each tree has a fine of $250 plus the maximum cost of the replacement of a tree under their tree mitigation plan. Again, this is inside the city limits and in the ETJ. There's a section on enforcement. Variances would come to city council, and of course the usual liability clause in all of our ordinances. Next step, of course, is first reading and second reading. We don't have those dates, as Mr. Hayes mentioned to you before. And Philip mentioned to you there are some things that we want to review in this ordinance before we bring it back for a final draft. Be pleased to answer any questions.
Comments or questions?
Do we have to have a permit now to
No.
cut down a tree?
We do not. We do have a grading permit. So if you are just removing trees or brush, there is no requirement. If you start grading the land, there is a permit for that.
So if I had a dead tree in my yard right now, I could go in there and cut it down?
That's correct.
Even under this ordinance, you can put down a
Right.
Yeah. But you would have to have a permit.
Right. Your tree trimmer would have to get a permit for that.
Yeah.
And they would show that it is dead or diseased.
And what is the permit fee?
We
Or
don't have
what
that
would
yet.
it be?
I'm trying to remember what we looked at for other cities. I'll get back to you on that.
Okay.
We had a
We need permit
recommendation,
to cut a dead tree.
You will. Mm-hmm.
just to ensure that it is actually dead or diseased, and it's not just, we removed it because it was dead and you have a stump left to discuss at that point.
There's a provision within this proposed ordinance for a tree that endangers property or
That is-
passerby.
Yes,
You can remove it. You still have to have a permit to do so, but
that's
you
right.
can remove it. Questions, Mr. McKinney?
Well, I'm all in favor of protecting the trees. I don't know, seems overly bureaucratic. I mean, well, that's pretty, I think it's simpler if you're trying to control the developments but to go back against homeowners and their own trees and getting permits and caliper inches and I don't know, it just seems like it's, I'm in favor, but I think this is maybe too much.
Mr. Harris?
Mr. Paxton, 104-3 under C says all professional tree care or landscaping companies shall obtain a permit. Does it have to be a professional arborist that goes in to do this? Or is that a requirement we could have to ensure that it's done correctly and properly and safely?
It would
Or-
not have to be an arborist, but the tree trimming and landscaping companies would have to register as a contractor to be able to get those permits.
We're not just gonna give permits blindly to whoever wants them.
Right.
I'm all in favor of it. I was, Mayor Herring and Councilmember Hughes and myself were on council last time when this was brought to us. There was a lot of discussion, about heritage size. I would personally, and I know it's not possible for every scenario, but 60% of the total protected inches, I would like, like I said, I know it's not possible when you start doing things like this, but if it's a heritage tree, we need to do everything we can to maintain that tree and be like, we're saving this one. It's not going to get cut down, and I don't care how many trees we're gonna plant to replace it. So it's, that's just a personal feeling on that, so. I know other cities, and I've talked to people over in Marble Falls. They do have a tree ordinance, and they have a program that if you cut them, you get a replacement for it. And, I think they're having a hard time sometimes enforcing that, just from what I've gathered through some conversations. And I think that if we're gonna do this, it needs to be enforced. 100%. Cut a tree, plant, whatever we say is the ordinance. So, thanks.
As I read through the proposed ordinance, the draft ordinance, I noticed there's a player in here that we don't currently have on staff or it's called a city arborist. Would that be a paid position? Would that be a contracted position? Who is the city arborist?
At this time, it would be a contracted position. Depending upon the amount of work and how often we're using that, it may make sense at some point to hire somebody. But at this time, we were just looking at a contracted position for those reviews.
And arborist is pretty well defined as, in this section, but I noticed that arborist plays a large role, not only in the enforcement, in the permitting process, but also in the enforcement process.
That's right.
So that person would likely be fairly busy.
So we would work with our building inspectors and engineering inspectors both because they're actively on the job site throughout the project. If they saw anything, then we could contact the arborist to
Gotcha.
review it.
Well, one of the features of our community are the established trees, and especially in the older neighborhoods. And I think as a community, we benefit. But like has been mentioned, I think some of the homeowners may have other ideas about this. It's been said this is not a property rights issue, but it is a property rights issue in that the tree is someone's property.
Right.
I've read the ordinance. I like what I've read here. I'm concerned about that arborist, that we have someone that's not only qualified, but able to meet the workload, okay? Because that, if we're gonna do it, like Mr. Harris says, we want to enforce it. We want it to actually be used.
Right.
And I don't particularly get emotional about trees. I don't, because they're someone's property. If they want to cut them down, they can cut it down. But I think if, as a community, we decide that preserving trees is important, and I think it's mentioned even in the 2050 plan. This is a good step at it. I think if I'm reading the agenda bill correctly, it's just for discussion tonight. Have we given you anything to look at as you refine your draft, or?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
we'll work with.
Also, there's a member of the audience who is an arborist and can help with some of the definitions. I hope we'll reach out to him
I certainly will.
during that time. And any of the arborists or any other specialists in the community who have suggestions, because, my entire living has been based on trees that have been cut down, and made into paper. So
You do have at your place the recommended tree list. We worked with
I did see it.
We worked with several tree experts in the community. Riverside Nature Center helped bring people together, had park staff review this. So we did update that list based on our local tree natives. So
Gotcha.
we'll continue working with those groups as
Yeah,
well.
the tree of heaven's all over downtown, isn't it? Okay, any other comments or questions? Any other suggestions or input for them as they refine this? Anybody?
Now, I'd just like to see some of the costs, like what would it cost for an arborist and what would it cost for a permit and that sort of thing.
Okay.
If you can get that to me.
Good, yeah, what would the homeowner slash property owner, what would the expense be just to get a permit?
Right.
All right, good. Anything, Mr. Harris? Either one?
No. Yeah, but I forgot what I was gonna say.
It's okay.
No, it's, I know there have to be provisions, because I saw it on Guadalupe Street this week with power lines, where they were trimming the trees out of the lines. But the other thing is my question is kind of like watering your yard, I guess. Who's gonna turn somebody in? I mean, if you're just out cutting a tree down in your yard and you don't have a permit, you don't have a arborist out doing it, you know, is it gonna be your good neighbor that picks up the phone and calls the city and says, hey, they're, cutting a tree down? Do y'all know about this?
Right.
So, I mean, there's a couple of things like that that would have to be looked at, I'm sure, but.
Right.
So,
So,
that's
I trim my own trees, just, you know, mostly smaller limbs, not huge. I mean, where's the cutoff on that? I mean,
I'll look into that and see what the limitations are. I certainly don't want to prohibit somebody maintaining their yard.
oh, it hangs down, and you can't
Yeah.
walk under them, you have to
Right.
trim them, and
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I probably ought to cut my 3 trees this week.
It'll be a little while.
well,
before I
you need
see
to get sunlight to the grass, you need to keep them trimmed up, so.
Well, pruning's allowed, just not topping's not allowed.
Correct.
Severe pruning's not allowed. All right, anything else? All ready to go on to item 2D, Community Arts Program Update. And we'll go to Ms. Boyle.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This afternoon, we have Catherine Boyette. She's the Community Arts Program Director at the Kerrville Convention and Visitors Bureau, and she will be providing an update on their initiatives, specifically the murals that will be going in on Louise Hayes Park Bridge, and those agreements will also be on your agenda at your regular meeting this evening. Catherine?
Good afternoon, Council. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me. I won't take too much of your time. A quick update. So this current public art installation falls within 2050. Its specific action item is P67. It was to encourage an art program or other enhancements for the walls under the Sidney Baker Bridge. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit about that public art process and where we are today. So site was selected last fall. The request for qualifications went out for approximately 2 months, from December to February. We received over 80 applications, and staff did narrow those applications down to the top third. So that was narrowed down by if someone presented something that was way out of the budget scope, that wasn't presented to the Citizen Art Panel, for example, or was not in line with anything close to the theme of what we were looking for, that was character and nostalgia of the park on tribute to natural landscapes. That Citizen Art Panel met on February 20th and selected its top 5 applications. Staff conducted additional Zoom meetings on all 5 of those applicants. It went through the board of directors at the Kerrville Convention and Visitors Bureau, and it was narrowed down to 3 applicants. One was eliminated because they were out of state, and again, it was a budgetary issue, being able to, if we didn't want to be in any overages situation, and also a timeline situation. And then it went back to the Citizen Art Panel, and they unanimously selected an artist to move forward with. The gentleman's name is Doss, D-A-S. Also went before TxDOT with the supplemental agreement, and TxDOT approved the artist selection and the placement of the bridge murals, and the target date installation is this October. This is a large-scale view of the 3 walls, and this is an up-close rendering of the 3 images. So you can see it is local wildlife, it is a warbler, some local fish or hill country fish, as well as a landscape with a white-tailed deer. So all things that are reflective of and of people who use the park, family-friendly and accessible. And as Ashley mentioned, it will go for, the agreements will go for consent and the agenda this evening. But any questions you have now?
Questions or comments?
So these contracts are just for the rights of the artist and
Yes.
who owns
Yes.
which and what and all that, I guess. I mean, I read through them, but there's not anything in there about paying for them. That's a different.
Community arts, it's paid for by the CVB and the Community Arts Program, and the CVB maintains them as well. But this is authorization for the artist to work and for copyright, things like that.
What is the time? I'm sorry, go ahead, finish.
I was just gonna say, I think they look terrific. I think so. Good.
The citizens did a great job
What's
selecting
the
it.
timeline for completion of these?
October 13th through, I believe, the first week in November, so approximately 3 to 4 weeks.
Okay.
Given, there also is probably a week of prep too, before that, power washing.
I'm a frequent walker on the river trail. And the trail portion that goes beneath Highway 27 near the Shriner campus and the cemetery. Bridges, by their nature, drain on the supports. And even in the pictures you showed us, there are stains that come down on those supports. Is there any way to help preserve the murals from those
Yes,
stains?
Yes, so
Because I don't
part-
think it's happening on the Highway 27 bridge.
yes. So maintenance for this proposed project would be an annual light power washing, and that will be fine with the paint, and it won't destroy the integrity of the mural as well.
I mean, I think they're lovely, and I'm fully in support, but I would like them to look nice,
Yes,
especially within Louise Hayes Park, which is one of the jewels of our community. If they soon become stained and ratty looking, it will reflect poorly on us.
right. Maintenance is with the Community Arts Program for annual power washings and inspections.
It doesn't take away the paint.
No, as long as it's done lightly.
Well, you don't need anything from us tonight other than that this is for information, correct?
Yes.
But it's a lovely process. Did you get to say?
Is this artist, where is the artist from?
They're Texas-based artists out of Austin.
I neglected to ask Mr. Harris if he had comments.
Yes.
So it will be, it's on our agenda tonight for the regular council meeting, but I've got a couple of things,
Sure.
stuff and things. One, Mr. McKinney hit on, just kind of, I know there's no cost to the city for this, but you said that y'all did not use one of the artists because out of state and cost overruns. Is there a contingency that y'all have if there is a cost overrun or something happens where a lot of budget, where it's not gonna come back to the city? Secondly, you've said it, it's been said a couple of times in your presentation, and we all know, and I'm gonna touch a very soft subject right now, pressure washing. We will utilize tanks on trailers, and we're not gonna be hooking into water sources
Correct.
from up the hill with a water hose coming down and things like that.
Correct. It's a
Okay.
water truck.
Okay.
Yes.
That's just for clarification, because that's a very hot topic, as we all know, with water. But are there extra funds if something were to happen, or is it, we're contracted and this is what we're gonna pay you, and we don't, if there's a,
We have a small contingency that's within the community arts budget for this project specifically, but, we feel like we have good estimates and paint lines and project lines and feel confident that the artist will stay on track for at least, all of his labor and his fees.
I know that y'all do your due diligence and everything.
Yes,
Just
there's a small contingency.
one of those questions we
Yeah.
need to ask, so thank you. That's it, Mr. Mayor.
Anybody else? Anybody has more comments?
Oh.
All right, thank you for the presentation.
Ashley asked me to also mention that it is the biggest mural in Texas, I guess, on TxDOT property. And I guess I know it's the largest mural in at least a 60-mile radius. So hopefully a great tourist attraction.
Lovely. And it is an item on our regular agenda, as Mr. Harris has
Yes.
pointed out.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
ma'am. All right. The next item, 3A, needs to be discussed in executive session. Is there a motion then that we go into executive session in the appropriate designation, under the appropriate chapter?
Move to go into executive session under 51-087.
Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor, so vote. Passes unanimously. All right, we're going to go upstairs to executive session, and we will return. Well, about 6, probably.